All right, let's jump right in. We're talking about the book of 1 Chronicles. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Isn't this just a repeat of stories we already have? But, it is so much more than that. This book was written for a very specific reason, for a group of people who had lost just about everything, and were probably wondering if they'd lost their entire story along with it.
I want you to try and put yourself in their shoes for a second. Imagine you've just come back from decades of being exiled in a totally foreign place. You're finally back home, but it doesn't feel like home anymore. The temple? Gone. The king? Just a memory. And you're left with this huge question. Who are we even? Did God just forget about us? That's the massive identity crisis that 1 Chronicles is speaking directly into. It's not just a history lesson. For the people reading it back then, this was literally a map to help them find their way back to who they were. So, a story for exiles. And it's about so much more than just names. So how does the book even begin this whole rediscovery process? Well, it starts with a massive list of names. Seriously, 9 whole chapters of genealogies. And yeah, it can feel like a total slog to get through, but trust me, there is a really powerful reason for it. The author, who we call the chronicler, he's not just rattling off names. He is rebuilding a foundation, brick by brick. And this is where it all clicks. The whole point of those first 9 chapters, for these people, these returning exiles, to hear their family line traced all the way back to the very first man, Adam. Wow, that was a radical, powerful declaration. It was basically God saying through the writer, hey, I haven't forgotten you. You're not just some random group of people who got lost. No, you belong to this sacred, epic story that I have been writing from the very beginning.
And you'll notice the chronicler is super intentional here. He zooms in and gives a ton of attention to 2 specific tribes. Judah, that's the royal line, the kings, and Levi, the line of the priests. So right from the get-go, he's basically telling us what this whole book is going to be about. Good, righteous leadership and real, faithful worship. These are the 2 pillars that they're going to rebuild their entire identity on. Next up, A Tale of 2 Kings, a real study in contrast. Okay, so after laying that whole foundation of who they are, the story finally kicks into gear, and it does it with this really powerful comparison. We get the story of Israel's first 2 kings, Saul and David, and they're set up as complete opposites. And the difference between them is, well, it's night and day. The chronicler barely even talks about Saul's reign, just kind of summarizes his whole failure in one single idea. He didn't seek the Lord. He relied on himself, and so his kingdom just collapsed. But then, bam, David comes on the scene, and he's introduced as the one who does seek the Lord. His kingdom doesn't start with a big power grab. Instead, all of Israel comes together, united to make him king. So one of the very first things David does as king of this now united Israel is capture Jerusalem. And this isn't just some smart military move, What he's really doing is establishing a central capital, a beating heart for the whole nation that's both political and spiritual. He's literally creating a home base where God's presence can live right there in the middle of his people. Which brings us to the heart of the kingdom, God's presence. And really, this gets to the absolute core of who David is in this book. Forget the military wins, forget the political power. David's #1 desire, his greatest passion, is to bring God's presence, which is symbolized by the Ark of the Covenant, right back to the center of everything. But David's first try at bringing the Ark to Jerusalem, it's a complete disaster. Why? Because he tries to do it his way, not God's way. But this right here is the key difference between him and Saul. David doesn't just get stubborn and double down. He actually stops. He humbles himself, and he learns from his mistake. He goes back to the books, studies the law to figure out the right way to do it. And the second attempt? A massive, joyful success filled with celebration and real proper worship. So when the ark finally makes it into Jerusalem, David leads the people in this incredible song of praise. You see, for David, worship was never meant to be this quiet, private little thing. No way. It's supposed to be a loud, public, joyful announcement of who God is and what amazing things he's done. It's about shouting it from the rooftops, making his deeds known to everybody. All right, next, a promise for eternity, God's covenant. So God's presence is back in the capital, everything's going well, and David gets this idea. He's thinking, I'm living in this beautiful palace made of cedar, but the Ark of God is just sitting over there in a tent.
So he decides he wants to build God a permanent house, a magnificent temple. But God has something even bigger and way more surprising up his sleeve.
And this moment right here is the pivot point for the entire book. God completely flips David's plan on its head. He basically says, David, you think you're going to build me a house? No, no. I am going to build you a house, an eternal dynasty. God promises that one day a descendant from David's line will reign forever. For those exiles reading this, can you imagine? This was an absolutely breathtaking promise of a future messianic king. So, how does David react to this mind-blowing promise of an eternal kingdom? Does he get all puffed up with pride? Not at all. He responds with just profound humility. He is completely blown away by God's grace. And this reaction is the exact polar opposite of Saul's whole "I can do it myself" attitude. It just goes to show you that real greatness in God's kingdom comes from understanding just how small you are and how big He is.
Now we get to the king's final act, a legacy of worship. As we get near the end of David's life, the chronicler really focuses in on how he shores up his legacy. And it's fascinating because his legacy isn't about all the battles he won or the wealth he piled up. No, it's about setting the stage for a future that is completely centered on worshiping God.
I mean, just look at what he does in his final days. He organizes the entire system for worship: priests, musicians, gatekeepers, the whole shebang. He gathers this unbelievable stash of resources: gold, silver, stone, wood, for a temple that he knows he's never even going to see. And then he publicly charges his son Solomon, basically telling him in front of everyone, hey, being faithful to God, that's the bedrock of this whole kingdom. So here's the bottom line. The chronicler isn't trying to paint David as some perfect, flawless superhero. We know from other parts of the Bible that he made some huge mistakes. But the picture we get here is of a man whose defining quality was his devotion. He was a guy who, even with all his flaws, just kept seeking the Lord with everything he had. And this brings us full circle, right back to those exiles, sitting in the ruins of their nation, wondering if God had just completely abandoned them. This entire book, from those long lists of names at the beginning to David's final acts at the end, is designed to thunder one single central message into their hearts. God is faithful. He has not forgotten you. He always keeps his promises. So you see, the message of 1 Chronicles was a lifeline, an anchor for people who felt totally adrift in the sea of history. It reminded them of who they were by reminding them of whose they were, who their God is, which kind of leaves us with a big question to chew on, doesn't it? In our own lives, when we feel lost or disconnected, what's the anchor that holds us to our story?
Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. It really helps us.